The rant is go! To predict the future, one must understand the past. Such words are often repeated, and while it may seem like a trite sentiment, in the case of this episode of The Rant is Go, the saying couldn't be truer. We are fast approaching a time where console games may not be delivered on disc, but instead on cartridges, or downloaded from a server, or even streamed over the internet via the cloud. Now, this news may feel well-trodden for those who frequent certain other demagogues' editorialist videos of pontification, but I feel that without exploring the history and technical nature of this issue, one is oversimplifying things. As such, this video will serve to inform you, the viewer, on where we're headed, why we're going there, and enlighten you about the consoles of history that you may not have had the pleasure to play with. Things are going to get technical up in this bitch, so hold on tight for episode 3 of The Rant is Go. Disc, cart, or cloud? The year was 1992 and Sega was introducing America to the Sega CD, the first CD-based gaming console. Sort of. It was an attachment for the Sega Genesis that allowed it to play games off of a disc. This higher capacity format meant that for the first time ever, videos and CD quality music could be in mainstream home console video games. However, Sega thought that there was no better way to drive home the concept of radically better gaming a la compact discs than to duplicate the gameplay of early Laserdisc games like Dragon's Lair and Space Ace. The Sega CD's library, for the most part, was full of movie games that were mostly QuickTime events and hardly recognizable as games by today's standards. There was also Sonic CD, which some say is the best Sonic, but that's bullshit. Regardless, that's not the point here, so let's move on. There were many consoles like the Sega CD that took a stab at the compact discs in a video game console idea and failed miserably. This was due in large part to the fact that the major technical benefits of CDs as a format for video games is capacity, but the then current game's 2D graphics didn't take up a whole lot of space. There was no real need for that much capacity without the proper hardware to demand it. As such, consoles that featured CDs were often overpriced, gimmicky crap until the release of the Sony PlayStation and Sega Saturn. With the new processing capabilities of these consoles, the industry finally seemed ready to make the transition from cartridges to CDs. There were two major benefits to CDs as a format: price and capacity. The larger sized CDs allowed for some novel things to be attempted with video games, but the real deal was the price. To produce the entire packaging for a game that was on CD was within only a few dollars at most, whereas cartridge-based games cost at minimum several times that. Because of the switch to discs, developers and publishers could make more money per game and were able to invest more in their games because of this. In fact, this price and capacity advantage is why the PlayStation 1 triumphed over the N64. The third parties found the lower cost, higher capacity PS1 far more attractive than the cartridge offerings of the N64. Games sometimes cost $20 or more less on the PS1 and still yielded better profit margins. Though the benefit of the move to discs was perfectly valid back then, various aspects are starting to change now. Flash media such as memory sticks, SD cards, and your average USB drives are all racing to match and even exceed the mighty Blu-ray's capacity. Additionally, flash media even has its own intrinsic advantages over discs when it comes to running video games. For example, when a game goes to a loading screen for the next level, the disk drive has to move the laser head all over the disk to find the textures, sound clips, AI, and polygonal data it needs for the next level. The head moving is what causes the motor sound you hear in your console when it's loading. With flash media, all of the information on the card is equally accessible, which cuts down majorly on load times. It can access the very first bit of code just as easily as the last and jump all over the place without any noticeable seek times. This technical advantage is great for free roaming games where it's constantly grabbing random bits of data to load in the next person, house, street, plant, etc. Even though flash-based media has caught up in capacity and is much better suited for games' needs than discs, there are still a few caveats. Cost remains a factor. Though the price of producing games on cartridges like those for the DS are much lower than the cartridges used decades ago, they still can't beat the price advantage of discs. Especially if they want cartridges with faster read speeds, which brings up the next problem. There's a misconception out there that flash-based media and cartridges read faster than discs. This isn't entirely true. When we switched to discs back in 1992, this was definitely true, but those cartridges were far more elaborate and very different from the flash media of today. To help illustrate the point, here are some read speeds on current discs in modern-day consoles. The PS3 has a 2x Blu-ray drive, which reads at 72 megabits per second. The 360 has a 12x DVD drive, which can read at up to 172.8 megabits per second. Note that the 360 drive reads at 240% the speed of the PS3's. Throw that in a Sony fanboy's face the next time they get uppity about that Blu-ray drive. It's always fun. Anyways, modern-day Blu-ray drives can read at up to 12x, so if the Wii U features a licensing-free Blu-ray equivalent or derivative, it could read at up to 432 megabits per second. So we have 72 megabits, 172.8 megabits, and a potential 432 megabits per second from the Wii U. Now, guess how fast an SD card can read? Any guesses? The answer is 80 megabits per second on a Class 10 SD card. That is the highest grade of SD card on the market. Though that trumps the 2x Blu-ray drive, it doesn't hold a light up to the others in that list. Ultimately, the point here is that it's true you don't have to move the reader around to access the data on the disk, but the raw data read speeds are slower in comparison. This is why Ridge Racer 3D looks like the PSP Ridge Racer and takes just as long to load even though it's on an SD card. Flash media cards are not inherently faster than discs, and though it's a major improvement for games, it wouldn't make load screens go away. Admittedly, it would help free roaming games run better, and it would also help alleviate texture popping. Silicon-based storage for games is still a definite possibility, but in order to get better read speeds, one would have to use a custom format designed for speed, or perhaps just the cream of the crop in quality flash media. I'm extremely interested in the specs for the NVG format, that's the format for the PlayStation Vita, but they have yet to spill the beans on that aside from its DLC and patch storing abilities. Which reminds me, the theoretical cartridge the Game Overthinker episode titled Putting the Cart Before the Cloud brings up that can store data on the cartridge is exactly what the Vita's cartridge does, and this was announced back in March at the Game Developers Conference, months before that video came out. Way to be ahead of the curve, buddy. Anyway, read speeds on flash memory tends to be slower, access times are much faster, and their capacity is par if not better going forward. The final factor is price. Here's the major holdup on when we might go back to cartridges. In order for the read speed to improve, the price of manufacturing the format will increase, and this will cause profit margins to decrease. Obviously, the benefits this would have on gaming aren't as important as the almighty profit margin. So even though the switch back to cartridges as a format for consoles is more possible now than it has been in years, the cost of going with one still seems too high for now. Perhaps by the time the next PlayStation comes out. Now, downloadable games are really the wave of the future here. The only thing that has stopped them from receiving larger support on consoles is the manufacturers themselves. Steam is a very successful platform with tons of support from publishers, and that even has more technical problems than a downloadable store for a console would. There have been initiatives from Sony and Microsoft to offer more full retail games digitally, but the number of titles this happens for pales in comparison to the number released. It is arguably a contractual problem at this point. There are a lot of legal dealings in making a video game, and when you don't phrase the original contracts in a way that can work for digital releases, there can be show-stopping problems. Legal liabilities, you know. This is one of the reasons why the US PlayStation Store sees so few PlayStation 1 classics. But there is one platform from the big three to actually do things right, and none of you will guess which that is. All games developed for the Vita are put through a single submission process for both digitally distributed titles and retail games. If you make a game for the Vita, it's made for the PlayStation Store and a real store. This has several great advantages for gamers and is, in my opinion at least, one of the reasons why the Vita may well be the best platform Sony has ever made. I'll go into this in another video, tentatively titled, Why Vita is the Jesus of Portables. I'm just kidding. So legal dealings are one of the main reasons why consoles haven't taken off with digitally distributed full-size games yet, but that will definitely change. However, every analyst and developer in the game industry has been saying this for years. Instead of spending too long on the obvious, I move now to discuss the edgy, the provocative, all the rave and internetsville, the cloud. OnLive is currently the only consumer-oriented cloud-based gaming platform. OnLive allows users to go in and buy games that they can play over the cloud. Basically, OnLive has a PC at their data center that runs the game you want to play, and then dedicated hardware encodes the video into a fast 720p stream that is sent to you 60 times a second. Your mouse and keyboard inputs go directly to their hardware, so it renders the illusion that you are playing the game actively on your system. It's really ingenious. It alleviates the concern of needing to upgrade hardware in order to play a game and is great for checking out demos. In my experience, the latency or lag between my inputs and the game reacting was minimal and almost non-existent. Almost. The video feed was fairly good, but it was still filled with artifacts, especially around text. To most, these issues wouldn't be terribly apparent at first. The concept of being able to play games without top-of-the-line gaming hardware is very appealing. Personally, however, I don't want to pay money to own something that isn't in any way, shape, or form in my true possession, whether it be on my hard drive or on a disc I own. And if I buy something, I want it to look the best it can. I really enjoy using OnLive for demos, but I can honestly never see myself buying a game on it. Moving on to the more obscure and even weirder contender in the cloud gaming market, Gaikai. Gaikai runs a very similar outfit to OnLive technologically, but their business approach is completely different. They are working to run demos over the cloud so people can try new games and then go buy a copy. I think this approach is much more solid on a business front. The publisher pays Gaikai for how much time people play the demo, and that's that. Gaikai doesn't have to sell people on the concept of pseudo-owning games on their platform or the appeal of omnipresent gaming, but just let them try the game, and then publishers throw money at them. The only thing I wish that would happen with Gaikai is that they would provide a centralized hub for people to see all the demos they have online. Concerning the cloud, what I expect to see in the future is a sort of combination of OnLive and Gaikai being offered by the PlayStation Store or Xbox Live Arcade, wherein demos are streamable from these services, but the full game needs to be downloaded before you can play. There is the thought of completely cloud-based consoles, where the console is really ridiculously cheap, but I don't think any of the big three are ready to leap on that anytime soon, as there are technical, logistical, and various other problems with such a system. Also, after the PlayStation Network got hacked, we couldn't play online games or Capcom's shitty DRM games for about a month on the PS3. Imagine if that happened with every game you owned! Yeah, it's a horrifying nightmare. A world without games. In any case, that liability and reduced value of the concept of cloud-based gaming combined with the inferior video quality seems like too much of a risk for a major product from the big three, at least for a while. That's why I see the cloud approach being used for demos, and more games going downloadable. I would like to note I have an advertised 35 megabits per second connection to the internet, so all of my experiences with OnLive are based on that connection. It can definitely get nastier at slower speeds. It also undeniably worsens in responsiveness and video quality when other people are using internet on the same connection, or during peak internet usage, or even during peak OnLive usage. My experiences were fairly pleasant, but they were on a relatively above-average quality internet connection in the dead of night. So here's a soundbite summary of my conclusions. Digital distribution is the next major platform, as if Steam wasn't enough to tell you that, and retail copies of games may transition to cartridges for consoles sometime in the next decade for performance and piracy-related reasons. The Vita is a very forward-thinking platform, and more consoles in the future will have a single submission system where games are published for both the online store and retail store without any legal complications or separate submissions. The cloud isn't quite ready yet for full deployment on ownership of games, but Gaikai has the right idea when it comes to demos. OnLive serves as a great way to try tons of games, but proves relatively unsavory for purchasing them. The huge X factor of connection speed will greatly impede the cloud for console-wide adoption for a long time. Expect to see systems similar to OnLive or Gaikai implemented in the future by Microsoft and Sony for at least trying out games. Also, it's remarkably likely that Steam may try some shit with the cloud, and GameStop is currently working on a tablet for gaming via the cloud that uses a controller, so that too has potential, or is at very least interesting. Currently, though, internet connections generally aren't fast enough for this sort of thing to look and feel exactly the same as a normal game would. Well, that's my rant, and thanks for listening. Now I'm going to go rant about my capture card not working. Relevant fun fact. The founder of Gaikai is also the founder of Shiny Entertainment, David Perry. Irrelevant fun fact. Gabe Newell once consumed an entire bus full of children. Concerning fun fact. Gabe Newell could ban me from Steam if he really wanted to.